Hello and welcome back to Bookish Brits. My name is Michelle, and in this past week I bought a book. This book, in fact, and buying this book reminded me of one of my most embarrassing moments in terms of meeting an author. I'll get to that story in a minute. But because I bought that book and because of it, I thought that today I would share with you my top 3 awkward author encounters. I've been really lucky in the last few years that I've been able to attend a lot of bookish signings and events in which authors were in attendance and had a lot of my books signed. That wasn't always the case, and sometimes some of these author encounters have been incredibly awkward. In the third position is the time that I met Garth. You guys, I love Garth. I absolutely adore his stories. The whole Sabriel trilogy series is incredible. I love the characters, the setting, the whole story, the relationships, everything involved in those books. I've read his short stories, his like horror dystopian stories. I'm a huge fan, and so I can't remember how I found out about it, but I did eventually find out that Garth was going to be at the bookstore nearest to where I used to work and still works. And I made sure to be there. I wanted to be there. I wanted to meet him. I wanted to chat with him and have him sign my books. But by the time I got to the front of the queue, because there was a pretty big queue and it sort of spanned the whole children's section, I got really tongue-tied and nervous. I was also a little bit confused about what was going to happen. So that because it was the first time I'd met an author. It was the first time I'd met a favorite author at that. I was so tongue-tied. He asked me if I wanted him to dedicate his signature to me, and I don't know what it is about it, but I was like, no, that's okay. Really nervous. And obviously I wanted a dedication, but I ended up walking away with just a signature, even though he asked me like 3 times, are you sure you just want a signature and not to Michelle or whatever? And I was so embarrassed that I didn't go back on that. And now I have a whole stack of lovely books signed by him, and it is nice that I met him because he is lovely, but I didn't get them dedicated to me because I was so embarrassed and awkward. Look back on that whole experience and I just shake my head and sigh, and I just think, oh, what is the matter with me? So that is awkward author experience number 3. In second place was definitely another newish author signing, in that I was quite new to it. I think a lot of authors can be quite nervous as they're signing books for their fans, because it's just small talk after small talk going on and on forever, and if you're kind of an anxious person anyway, it's a whole lot of small talk too much. And I think that was definitely the case with John Green when I met him after his Paper Towns talk and signing after the publication of this, and it was fine. I did have him dedicate his signature to me, at least, so that has to be a step in the right direction, but we had our wires kind of crossed in terms of the small talk. So he asked me where I'd come from. I thought that he meant he'd picked up on my American accent and he was asking me where I was from. So I said Oregon, and he said, oh, is that far away? Because obviously he's nervous and he has to put up with hours and hours of small talk as he signed all of these books. And I kind of laughed at him and I said Oregon is in Oregon in the United States, and he was like, oh, obviously thinking that wasn't the question that I asked you. And afterwards I just kicked myself for absolutely ages because I played it all back in my head, and he wasn't asking me where I was from. He'd asked me, you know, where I'd come from that day. Oh, so obviously all of the awkwardness from that conversation was down to me. It was awful, 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 awful. That leads me on to the third and final author encounter and where the story about this book comes in. I think it was at the beginning of this year that I was invited to an event at Mirror Inc. in which I was able to meet one of my favorite authors, Maria V. Snyder, the author of the trilogy, the Glass trilogy, and others. Now, I love Maria V. Snyder. I brought a whole stack of books for her to sign, but there's so many of them that this book actually was the book in question that made things slightly awkward, because I bought this book in a charity shop. And how do authors actually feel about when books are brought in their ex-library or charity shop finds? I don't know, but I have read this book. I just haven't read this copy of this book because I read this as a library copy, and then I wanted a copy of my own, and this wasn't in bad condition, and I found it at a charity shop. Anyway, I handed this book over along with the other books, and the reason it was incredibly awkward is, I don't know if you can see it there, this book was signed, obviously, and dedicated to Sarah. And it says the sea is full of treasure, and it's got Maria's signature. And what she's done is she crossed that out and wrote my name and underlined it and put a couple of exclamation points, and then signed a date. And it was just so mortifying that I didn't realize that this book had already been signed from her. And then, you know, that whole awkward situation in which I had to explain that I bought it at a charity shop, and I was already feeling uncomfortable, thinking, you know, is that is that like something that people don't do? Admit that you bought it at a charity? I don't know, and it was awful, and it made me cringe for a really long time afterwards. I felt so hideously bad about this whole author encounter. It made me feel really bad. I don't know, is that just me? Would you have felt awkward in that same position? I'm not sure. Which leads me on to this book, and why it sparked this whole video, is that I bought this book in a charity shop. I did read this book, and I love it. I love this series, and I love this author. But my copy was either misplaced, if it was a physical copy, or perhaps I read this one as an ebook. I'm not entirely sure, but I know I don't have a copy of this book. And CJ Daugherty is going to be at an event in October called YA Shot, and I thought, oh, I saw this in a charity shop, let me just take that, and then I can have it signed by her in October. I got home, and I don't know what made me check, but look. Can you see that one? It reads, to Maddie, lots of love, CJ Daugherty. So this one's signed as well. Imagine if I hadn't looked, and I met CJ at YA Shot, handed that one over, and it had already been signed to someone else. Do let me know if you think that I'm overreacting about this whole, this book has already been signed by someone else sort of thing, but I'm just letting you know I was very awkward and embarrassed about these three encounters. Share your own awkward author stories. I would love to hear them, especially if they're worse than mine and they make me feel better. Please do that. Please, please, please. I would love that. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again next time.